I have with me Deb Olson, and I'm going to just start by introducing myself. Then I'll ask you to introduce yourself, your affiliations, anything you want, whoever is going to be listening to this. Mostly, it should be like business owners, and also just in general, the employee ownership community. So consultants, and any service provider in this community. So my name is Lizah Makombore. I'm originally from Southern Africa. I say that because I was born in Zimbabwe, and I'm a South African permanent resident. I did all my college education at the University of Cape Town, so both my undergrad and my master's in development finance. I did them at the University of Cape Town, and I'm currently a PhD student with the Community Development and Applied Economics faculty at the University of Vermont. My PhD is in Sustainable Development, Economics, Public Policy, and Governance. I know that's a mouthful. Took me a while to get it right. And my research interests at the intersection of global inequality, ecological crisis, and essential resources. So by essential resources, I mean food, water, and energy. So I'm really critically trying to inquire into cooperative economies, employee ownership, shared wealth, those types of innovations to inform my broader research thesis and research questions. So that's who I am. My master's thesis was in water sustainability and water stewardship. So I'm glad to be here with Deb, and today's objectives, or the purpose rather for this YouTube series, is to educate and bring awareness of employee ownership, specifically looking at ESOPs, which is employee stock ownership plans, ESOPs. Yeah, so we're going to be throwing that acronym around, and also EOT, which is Deb. So Deb does both ESOPs. So if you go to a website, it's ESOP Law, but she also has been looking at EOT. I think it's Employee Ownership Trust. Deb, you can correct me, which is
why
another.
Why don't you let me do that? That's fine.
Okay, so I'll let Deb do also the acronyms like properly, and introduce yourself. So introduce yourself, how you, the journey you have walked to get up to, where you are now. I'm super excited. That's why I'm like all over to have Deb with me, precisely because of her experience in employee ownership, her contributions. She started writing on employee ownership. I think she told me it was like in the 80s. I'm like, I was like in kindergarten or something, maybe not even have started. So I have so much respect, and I'm humbled to have her here, but super excited. I know that whoever is going to be listening, you're going to gain a lot and have a lot of your questions clarified. So Deb, take it away.
Okay.
And I'll be probing questions as we go. Thanks, Deb.
Okay, so I'm Deborah Groban Olson, and I have been, I'm an attorney. I've specialized in employee ownership for the last 44 years, various kinds. I have experience with employee stock ownership plans, employee ownership trusts, cooperatives, and a variety of other alternative ways that people have wanted to do employee ownership. I came to this initially, I was a union side labor lawyer, and in the 1980s, I realized that the jobs were running away from the workers, And then I learned also, because in 1974, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, ERISA, was passed, and in it was the provisions for the employee stock ownership plan. So I learned that employee ownership was a possibility. And that began my career of working on creating employee ownership that was very worker friendly, and providing participation and voice and adequate equity for workers. I just want to say one of the reasons I'm so excited to be talking with Lizah is that her background and her experience and what she is focusing on doing right now, and the fact that she's from South Africa and she wants to do it, is very exciting to me. Okay, a couple of things about my background. Okay, so I've had my own practice for at least 45 years or so. During that time, I've also been the executive director and often the founder of a number of nonprofit organizations. Initially, the Michigan Employee Ownership Center, which was founded in 1982, 84, I don't know. We helped the Ohio Employee Ownership Center get organized. Then I became the board chair of the National Center for Employee Ownership. While I was board chair and CEO, I became very interested in the issue of, could broad ownership be a solution for some of the negative impacts of globalization? Because during the 80s, it became increasingly clear that the global economy was making it more and more difficult for local communities to continue to control particularly the productive assets in those communities. That more and more of those were getting consolidated in fewer hands and fewer hands that were further away. So one of the things that I did in the 80s was I started another, well, it wasn't exactly a nonprofit. Through the Ohio Employee Ownership Center, I had a long partnership with the Ohio Employee Ownership Center and with my dear friend, John Logue, who is one of the stars in the firmament of employee ownership, and you should read his books and studies.
Wow.
But we created something called the Capital Ownership Group, and it was an online think and do tank, but initially an online think tank aimed at getting people from all over the world involved in discussions about how to use broad ownership to deal with the negative impacts of globalization. And we started out thinking we would have 5 discussion groups, which immediately became 20 discussion groups. And we created some papers. We had a number of conferences. We had one conference that was at the US Senate Hart Office building. We had a conference in Europe. And the focus of our efforts initially was, can we get people from around the world to talk about how we could, instead of just having people from the first world talk about how to use employee ownership to deal with our problems, was like, how do we more generally use employee ownership to deal with the crisis that capitalism was going through? And was causing more and more people to have less and less. So that was the Capital Ownership Group. And one of the things that came out of that was, well, there were a couple of things, but I ended up doing a couple of publications out of that. My first publication on employee ownership was in 1981. And it was about a 100-page law review article called Union Experiences with Worker Ownership. And it's got a very long title, ESOPs, CHASOPs, I don't know, other things. But it basically was, I think, the first real work in American law on what the issues were for unions to help workers do worker ownership. And so the first half of it is some examples people probably don't even know about anymore, like Rath Packing and various other companies that I can't remember off the top of my head. It's a 1982 Wisconsin Law Review article. If you go on my website, esoplaw.com, you can find my publications. But anyway, the second half of it was really a discussion of all of the various legal issues involved for unions in trying to help worker ownership. So in 1981, when this was published, I was sitting in a very lonely corner of employee ownership and unions. Basically, there was maybe one or two other people there. Now I am very pleased to say the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops has had a union co-op committee for the last at least 10, maybe 15 years. And more importantly, there are a number of international unions that are creating strategies, significant strategies that are both worker ownership strategies and social justice strategies, using worker ownership. And the UFCW and the Service Employees Union are two that are really doing a lot of that. I happen to be working right now with a program with the United Food and Commercial Workers, where in the cannabis industry, they are working in various states. First of all, they've been organizing in the cannabis industry for about 10 years, but also they've been working in a number of states to get very progressive laws that provide not only, now that they're legalizing cannabis, that have set-asides for dispensaries for worker co-ops, set-asides for dispensaries for social equity companies, meaning companies composed of people who've been hurt by the war on drugs, which generally means people of color in communities that were hurt by the war on drugs, and also labor peace. And so the first of these that is going on right now is in Rhode Island. Rhode Island has a law where they've gotten a very progressive law. And one of the reasons they got this very progressive law, there was a coalition of activists, including incarcerated, and a number of community organizations. So there's something called Reclaim Rhode Island.
Reclaim, wow.
And it's part of a Reclaim organization that's doing this around the country. But anyway, it so happens that this is we're doing this pilot project right now, which is helping the first group. The law has been passed. The commission is still in the process of setting up its rules. But since January, so it's now almost the end of July, we've been working with a group of 6 people from the Providence community, all people of color, a number of them previously incarcerated, to set up a cannabis dispensary. And they've been getting the kind of support, the surrounding support from a union that is absolutely necessary for a startup like this. In this industry, there are lots of big players. So a mom and pop startup, a worker-owned startup is a very, very hard thing to do. However, in places like Mondragon, and I don't know how much you people know about Mondragon, but in Mondragon, they've made it possible because they have a whole support network that provides help. And in the United States, we've been trying over the last 40 years or so to create similar networks. So one of those networks, the Cincinnati Union Co-op Initiative, which is now called Co-op Cincy, is also affiliated with, Our Harvest is a union worker co-op that works with the UFCW. And so they've been around for about 10 years. One of the things that happened here is that, so the UFCW got involved with this group. Local 328 persuaded the New England district, whatever their district is, to come up with the money to hire a full-time organizer to work with not just this co-op, but there are 6 co-ops that will be possible under this law with set-asides for worker co-ops. And so they've got a person who is essentially working for the union, but as a co-op organizer. And so first of all, Co-op Cincy gave these folks 14 weeks of free training in their training program on how to be a worker co-op. And since then, we've been working with them, the union and its staff, and myself as a volunteer also, because of my long relationship with the UFCW, to work through their bylaws and help them develop a business plan, do all the things that they need so that when it comes time to applying for a license, they will be in a position to have a business plan and be able to go ahead and do it. And the hope is that this will be replicated. Probably that the desire is to make at least 6 of these in Rhode Island because they're set aside for 6 of them. But also there is interest in doing this in many places in the country. And the UFCW is doing this at various levels in 5 or 6 states. So what to me is very important about this is for years and years and years, I have been having conversations with the labor movement about worker ownership is a different strategy for organizing workers and protecting worker rights. So, you know, collective bargaining is great, and having union contracts, even in co-ops, is a great idea. But worker co-ops need other things. But a lot of the other things they need are things that international unions are in a good position to provide in terms of connections, assistance to getting apprenticeship programs, understanding how to work in the political system, and having access to professional people like me. I mean, because guys in Providence would not have known that I was available, and I became available to them because Dennis Olson, who is the person in their international union who's been the most promoting employee ownership, I've been working with him on a lot of things. And he said, hey, this is beginning to happen. You want to work on it? I said, yes. He said, oh, by the way, we don't have any money to pay you. I said, well, okay, fine. I'll do this anyway, because it's so important to me to see something like this succeed. And I'm very happy to be working on that. So that is sort of a side note, which is sort of says where I come from is I want to help empower working people to have more control over their lives.
Wow.
I've been a union person. I from the time I was very young, beginning about age 11, I was involved with a co-op that I'm now on the board of. And so it was a education recreation center that, among other things, had summer camp and a lot of other things. But in that process, it was about social and economic justice, earth stewardship, peace, and teaching cooperation as a way of life. So I think one of the reasons why I always thought it was possible to help make worker ownership happen is because I was brought up with the idea that cooperation is not such a hard thing to do. It's a normal thing. Okay. So, so that's a little bit more than introducing myself, but that happens to be a project right now that I'm very excited about. The other thing, I guess.
I just wanted to ask you, just to clarify to the audience, this work that you're doing, the way I'm hearing you is that it's actually very strategic, because you are, and it's full circle for you. I'll tell you why, because you're now looking at taking this strategy to the next level, where it's not only about, you know, cooperation and cooperatives, or even the 6 principles of cooperatives, but you are saying there is also value in sort of cooperative startups, right? And how to do that in a systematic and in a way that will result in more successes than failures, because any business.
So let me just say something specific about that. One of the things we sort of all know from studying Mondragon and Emilia Romagna, and I'm not going to go into explaining those right now, is that it's extremely important to have a support system surrounding worker co-ops if they're going to thrive. And that's one of the things that, for example, the Ohio Employee Ownership Center worked on by having an employee-owned network of companies that met with each other and got education together. The VEOC is similar to that. So the fact that you have to have this kind of support system to really make this viable, it's like, okay, now we found a way. There are a couple of large international union institutions that say, yes, we see why this is a strategy that is useful to us in helping workers have more control over their lives. And the union co-op arrangement is something that makes sense. And and I could go into a whole explanation of that, which I won't right now, because that's another story. But it's become clear to me that there is no other institution around that's available to help workers create such co-ops. And the other thing that's important in the cannabis industry right now is that this is, I think, the first time laws are being created that are looking at racial justice in a different way than we have looked at it before ever in the United States. So that in a lot of these states, they're saying the war on drugs was particularly hard and made particular negative impact on communities of color. So therefore, when we make these dispensary licenses available, we're going to have set-asides for people from communities of color and also worker co-ops, and also set aside some money to help these social equity businesses survive. That aside,
and
that's
I think
all true.
it's speaking to the core sort of impacts of the social justice piece of it.
Yes.
Is what is critical here, really addressing it and say, okay, so this is what has been created by the war on drugs. And we have these people who have generally in the past been unemployable, right? So now how do we address this using the same strategy that we've been working on with unionized worker co-ops, but bringing it from that perspective, it makes sense. And I understand why you're saying this has not been done. And
it hasn't been done. And so for this to be, this is why I am so excited that I am, having been in this field now for 44 years, to be alive and to be able to participate in the situation where very early on, people were saying, what are you talking about? Unions and employee ownership, that doesn't make any sense, whatever. Now it's like people understand that. And now there is, some serious strategy that has important social equity implications, social and racial justice equity implications, which I think is just extremely important. So I'm very happy to be part of that. Now, that's really just part of what I do, because that's
fine.
So,
you were now talking about your work with ESOPs.
Yeah, I started working with ESOPs because that was the tool available at the time. And in the 1980s, I was working with most of the industrial unions in the United States, most of the CIO unions, some of the AFL unions, but many of the CIO unions, the UAW, the machinists, the steel workers, the food commercial workers, many of them.
The workers,
Basically, as employers were trying to divest themselves of businesses, there was a period before we got into competition with the Chinese when just getting the owner out of the picture left enough profit margin for you to have a profitable company, a profitable employee-owned company. Then when the Chinese got into this, when the Chinese competition started coming in, they were competing at such low wages that other strategies needed to come in. And that's really where it became necessary to think about, okay, what else is there besides just taking over these older companies? So anyway, so my focus throughout has been how to create employee ownership that works for people, that works for the selling owners, that works for the workers, that works for the union, that enables people to really have a say in their business. Because ESOPs have been used in some instances in a very insidious way, basically just to benefit selling owners at the expense of workers, sometimes their pensions and a lot of other things. So the projects I worked on were really sort of focused on, helping unions negotiate if there was going to be a sale to get the best partner in ownership that they could get.
Wow.
Okay, so that was, and I have had some, ESOP clients for many, many years. And like, for example, Maryland Brush Company was an employee-owned company for about 28 years. They sold the company a couple of years ago because they finally had a competitor who was eating their lunch. But that kept people working in the oldest factory in the city of Baltimore for 28 years, and they made good wages. And when in the end the company was sold, the employees got their chunk of what there was to get. And I have been in situations where where there's been litigation around people kind of swooping in, using an ESOP to buy a company from a widow, stripping out the pension to pay for the debt, and then having the workers have no pension. I mean, terrible things like that.
Wow.
Anyway, but maybe I shouldn't even be talking about that right now. So ESOPs are a very good way to do employee ownership if you are a big enough business to be able to afford. There are many, many wonderful tax benefits, but ESOPs were created as a part of the national pension law. Okay. And so they were created to provide benefit to workers as retirees, but not necessarily as workers. And so among other things, the fiduciary, the trustees of an ESOP have a fiduciary obligation to look out for the best interest of the participants upon their retirement, not necessarily keeping them in their jobs.
Okay, so, got you. So it's not immediate benefit, it's more long-term.
Well, I mean, there can be a lot of immediate benefit. All I'm saying is the outcome of that particular way of setting things up is that it made ESOPs subject to being rated by venture capitalists. So that even though employees might become owners of the company, if somebody else made a very high offer that was much higher than the ESOP value, the trustees would feel a lot of pressure to take that price. At which point you no longer have employee ownership. Gotcha. Okay, so that's one reason. That's one of many reasons why, there are a lot of people who've said worker co-ops are, a better thing. I don't have that. I've helped people set up worker co-ops. I've helped them set up
ESOPs,
multi-stakeholder co-ops. One of the difficulties with worker co-ops has been, it's been hard for them to get financing. That's changing. My view is that I'm a lawyer. All tools are useful tools. You use the tool that fits the job. You don't have to, you don't have to come to me and be a nail, because I have more than a hammer. I got screw. I got, many kinds of tools. And the tools that, there's ESOP and there's cooperatives.
I'm going to be borrowing that from you, because I feel like I totally relate in terms of the way I think, like whatever tool is going to help achieve, what needs to be done. Like in
right. And there has been a lot of debate in the employee ownership community about ESOP good, co-op
not good,
co-op,
co-op better,
or co-op good, ESOP evil. No. They're all tools.
Yes.
However, there is a tool that we borrowed from the British that we have no tax benefits for yet in the United States, that is turning out to be very useful to a lot of small business owners who are just too small to be able to. The problem with an ESOP is that in order to get the tax benefits, you have to do something fairly complicated. And you have to be spending money on it at a significant level every year for the reporting and
the valuation.
So employee ownership trust is essentially a much simpler thing. It's created under state trust law. Not every state in the country has a law that's good for this, because most states in the country have laws that have rules against perpetuity, so you can't make a perpetual trust. But there are a number of states through which you can make a perpetual trust. And the idea of an EOT is essentially an owner who wants to sell their company to their employees in such a way that it will stay employee owned, it will stay in the community.
Wow.
And a venture capitalist can't just come along and say, well, I would like to buy it. And there's a trustee who says, well, I got to sell to you. With an EOT, that's not the case. It's like the trust does not have to sell. It's like the purpose of the trust is to keep this thing employee owned and operating in this community in perpetuity.
Wow.
And so
that's what most small businesses want, or small business owners. They are worried about the legacy. They are worried about the community, the workers. So the EOT, I really want you to explain how this works, so that if there's anyone who's been thinking ESOPs, not a good fit for me, worker co-ops, not a good fit, I feel like you should really spend,
so EOT is basically, so it's essentially setting up a trust so that the owner sells or gives the company to the trust, usually sells.
Yeah.
So then the trust has a debt to pay back the owner.
Yes.
Usually that debt is paid out of dividends on the stock that's now in the trust. Which means you have to have a company that's producing enough. I mean, I would say in general with employee ownership, the company is buying itself one way or another.
Okay.
You have to have enough revenue, enough profitability that you can take out the money to buy the company from the owner, particularly if the owner wants to get paid.
Yes.
So you have a debt to pay the owner. You're going to have to be paying the owner over some period of time. And then, you know, you also want to be able to have employee ownership. A difference technically in terms of an EOT is that the employees don't own the stock. They are beneficiaries of a trust, just as in ESOPs, the employees are beneficiaries of a trust. All of their right to control the company, their governance rights, are in the trust document and to some extent in the articles and bylaws of the corporation. Okay. Mostly in the trust document. Okay. The profit sharing is generally done as a regular profit sharing plan through the company because it is more tax efficient for the profit sharing to go through the company. And it makes things less complicated. If you start running the profit sharing through the trust, then you're paying tax at the trust level. And that's not a good idea. I mean, it's more expensive. And these can be because you're just dealing with creating a trust under a state trust law if you have a state that allows you to make a perpetual trust. So I'm an attorney in New Hampshire, Michigan, and I've been licensed in Wisconsin, Illinois, and Arkansas. But my current licensing is Michigan and New Hampshire. And New Hampshire happens to have a very good law for creating employee ownership trusts. And so what we do in my practice is we use the New Hampshire law because we understand it, and we're trying to make employee ownership as efficient, trying to make an employee ownership plan that is as economically efficient as possible for the owner. So, you know, we basically get together with the owner and we find out what it is they want to do. I mean, people have different kinds of needs. Some people, there's one owner. In some situation, there's multiple owners. In some situation, there's family members. You know, so you have to sort of work out as you're working out how you're going to do this trust, how you're going to deal with the fact that some people might want to sell now and some people may be selling later. And how are you going to manage to deal with the value of selling now versus selling later, et cetera? There are many things like that. But the simplest description is if you have one owner, the owner comes up with a price to sell to the employees. Now, there is no law that says for ESOPs, there is a very strict Department of Labor set of rules about how you do valuation for an ESOP. That does not apply to an EOT. However, I will not do an EOT unless I feel like the value is reasonable for the employees. So when I talk to owners who are initially my clients, although again, when I am hired by a business owner to provide an EOT, I usually say, well, although you are hiring me, the company's hiring me, but the ultimate client is the employee ownership trust, even though it doesn't have anybody in it yet. At the moment, But it's, you know, that's the entity that I'm working for because you, owner, have your own lawyers and your own accountants, and we are two parties to this transaction. So you're selling to the employees. Usually that's not a problem. Frequently owners have a pretty good understanding what the value is, or they can figure that out. But what they don't have to do is they don't have to pay $15,000 or $20,000 for the kind of valuation you need for an ESOP. You know, you can do a reasonable valuation for a lot less than that. So you figure out what it's going to cost. Methodologies are you using like a fair market price valuation? Usually, I mean, that's usually a question for accountants, but it's in any given industry, there's generally a multiple of sales or multiple of earnings that's used as, you know, in our industry, it's 5x or 3x or 10x.
That's good information.
So usually that can be figured out relatively easily.
Okay.
And then so far we have been doing these with owner financing. It may be possible to have financing through other sources. When I was at your conference, I talked to several people who sounded like they might be willing to do that.
Yeah.
But, you know, so what's happening is over a period of time, the owner is selling his or her interest to the trust. And over a period of time, the employees are getting increasing rights to have say-so about things like electing the board, electing the trustees, and other sort of things having to do with how the company will be run.
Okay.
It's not a cookie cutter thing. They can be done in a number of different ways. But I mean, I have a method that I've been using for the last few years. And one of the things that I've discovered is after coming up with the legal documents, we usually create a launch guide that sort of, because we don't have a requirement for a summary plan description, create a launch guide that basically says, this is how it works. I mean, one of the things about having a perpetual trust is that you have trust protectors.
Okay.
The way you protect the perpetuity, whatever it is that the owner wants protected forever. Nobody lives forever. And so you have to have a system, and you have to have rules for how you're going to have a liquidation. Usually we have a purpose protector, a liquidation protector. There are various kinds of trust protectors. And again, it depends on the particular situation. But that's the mechanism for keeping the perpetual part of it happening. And then the other thing that's very different from ESOP and EOT is the difference between employees getting their shares at a value pegged against the market versus simply pegged against the profits of the company. So for example, in a co-op, what workers get in a co-op at the end of a year is their patronage dividend, their portion of the profits of the company. And in co-ops, that portion, which becomes qualified patronage dividends that goes to the employees, the company, the co-op itself does not pay taxes on. That portion which is retained by the co-op does pay taxes on at a corporate level. But so what the employees are getting in their patronage accounts is their portion of the profits in a given year. In an ESOP, the value goes up every year based on the market. So in other words, if your company gets pegged against all the other companies in your industry, this is one of the things that creates a problem in ESOPs called repurchase liability. Because public companies that have ESOPs, publicly traded companies, don't have to buy the stock back from the employees because there's a market. But privately held companies, which is all the ones I've ever dealt with, you know, have the obligation to buy the stock back from the employees. And so the problem is, it's not just profit sharing. It's like if the company has been doing well, and they are, in comparison to their industry, you know, doing well, growing, whatever it is, their value can keep going up and up and up and up. And as more employees get closer to retirement age, there's this increasing amount of the company's resources that are tied up in cash that is needed to pay repurchase liability. And I know this well, not only as a lawyer, but I was the board chair of a very successful 100% ESOP company for 10 years. And I was involved with the company as it went through the process of figuring out, okay, our repurchase liability is getting really big and we have other needs. We need to diversify our products. We need to put money into product development. We need to build a new factory. And how do we balance these things? And so trying to find a partner who wants to be a minority partner in an employee-owned business who will give you money to do those things is not an easy thing. So it is not unusual for some for some ESOP companies to be forced to sell because their repurchase liability is so much, or because a venture capitalist comes along and says, we like yours, we'll pay 3 times what your ESOP value is.
Yeah.
But in an EOT, as in a co-op, that's not what's happening. What's happening is it's explicitly not a pension plan. It is something that allocates profit sharing every year amongst employees based on whatever the company sets up as a profit sharing plan, whatever their priorities are, whatever their criteria are. That's not something that, there's nothing in an EOT that says what that has to be.
Okay.
It's just, we're saying that the way in which the company operates as a company that is for the benefit of the employees is that it has a profit sharing plan that shares profits with the employees in some sort of equitable way.
Okay.
But what that means is, in any given year, if there is a profit, the employees get some of it. Now, in the initial years when the company is being purchased by the trust.
By the trust, yeah. In the transition
dividends on the stock, there may not be a lot of money left for the employees to have distributions. They try to set it up so that even while they're paying off the owner, there's some distributions. But it's once that note is paid, that's really when it becomes significant. And then what you're saying is every year, the profit that's not needed to plow back into the company is allocated to the employees as annual profit sharing. So they're getting this distribution annually, which a lot of people appreciate, as opposed to having to wait till they retire, particularly if they're 25 years old and retirement is at age 62. But
makes sense.
The difference is, and this is
but
the thing,
is there some savings for retirement in an EOT or worker co-op or not? It's like
people need to have, a company needs to have a retirement plan, like a
401k
or something.
Okay, all right.
The employee ownership should not be the only retirement plan, because that's putting all your eggs in one basket.
I've just learned that recently, that most companies that are 100% employee owned also have a 401k as well as the ESOP as a retirement.
Right. So you need to have something else that's a pension plan.
Okay.
But a difference here is because in our culture, particularly with the Silicon Valley and all that, people are very used to the idea of people getting stock options. Okay. Stock options are based on the market.
Yeah.
So it's when you get a stock option, it grows as the market grows.
Yeah.
That's not what's going on in an EOT. In an EOT, you don't have a share that increases in market value. What you're getting instead is you're getting profit sharing at the end of this year. And then that's that. And then next year, if there's profit, you're getting profit sharing from that year, but you don't have a share that at some point you could sell for some huge price, because that's not how it's set up.
Okay. What of the years when you have losses? What happens?
Years when you have losses, there's no profit sharing.
Okay.
I'm just going to get myself some more water.
All right. So we're just going to be waiting for Deb, but I think what is coming out of this
is the same thing that happens. The same thing that happens in co-ops. There's profit sharing when there's profits, and when there isn't, there isn't.
All right. Got you.
And in some instances, when there are losses in a co-op, the member accounts may have to take the losses. They try to have that not happen.
Okay, great. But the one thing, though, that I also want you to just quickly cover as we wrap up is participation, employee participation in terms of the governance and control of the companies in ESOP, EOT, and just for you to give that, and worker co-ops.
Okay.
Yeah, to give that.
And so in co-ops, there's sort of a one worker, one vote idea.
Okay.
And that's one of the reasons why it is sometimes hard for an owner to get comfortable with selling to a co-op, because they're not sure they want to give away that much control in the beginning.
Okay.
Although there are various ways to do that. They don't, I'm not going to go into all that. I'm just saying that's one of the things about co-op. Okay. ESOPs, the law says all you really have to do in a closely held company, meaning not a company that's not on the stock market, is provide employees with the right to vote on any sale of substantially all the assets of the company.
Okay.
Merger, acquisition, or sale of all the assets of the company. It doesn't give you a right to have votes on the board of directors.
On the board.
Now, this is where the kinds of ESOPs I've set up have been very different. I've been setting up the ESOPs I've set up in the union situations and situations like Maryland Brush. There's been workers and the union have representation on the board of directors.
Okay.
And it's done in various ways.
So it kind of will, if the company has a culture where it's inclusive and wants workers to have some form of participation, then it would follow that the ESOP would have those types of mechanisms.
Okay, so culture, let me just
ESOP, they don't need to have a board representation by employees. I just want you to make it clear.
Well, I want to say something about the word culture. Or as Corey Rosen once said something and I thought was great. He said, a sense of ownership is like a sense of dinner.
Okay.
Okay, so it's like either you give people something that's real or you don't. So if you're giving people some right to have a say about something, you know, it's one thing to have a suggestion box or to say my door is always open. Yeah. It's another thing to have a process that says, when we make this kind of decision, these are the people who are involved in the process. So if a company that I was involved with for a long time, I was involved in helping create a decision-making system on 79 different kinds of decisions about who initiated action on those things, who had input, who was involved in the decision, and if there had to be ratification, like board or something, who ratifies it. So that's sort of a very developed system of that. So I think that the thing is, if you have a participatory culture,
yes,
I'm not quite sure what that necessarily means, but if you really want participation, you have a system that says we have an organized way in which we actively seek people to be involved, and we ask them to do particular things, and we have a way in which they get listened to, that we
sort of practice. Or
I'm thinking of it. It's like that which you count is what really sticks. So it's like if you're saying we have this metric for ourselves or this standard for ourselves, and that's how we make sure that this really happens. So in many ESOP companies, there are ESOP committees, there's participation, there's some very, very participatory companies. It's generally not so much in the legal governance. EOT has more of the participation in the legal governance because that's the whole thing that makes it. I mean, the only thing about the thing that makes the thing that makes the EOT an EOT is that it has provisions for workers to have rights in the governance system. Okay. And the money does not flow through that. The money flows entirely through
profit sharing,
which is sort of a separate channel. So I'm not sure what question I was answering here, but in terms of their participation, I mean, there are a lot of very good systems of participation. I mean, the open book management is one of them. Many ESOP companies use open book management. Co-ops use open book management. I mean, the idea that the people who do the work should understand, how does my work contribute to the bottom line? How do we measure that? Is there some indicator that I see every day on the wall? Or on my computer that says, we're doing well on this thing and this thing, and that means you're going to have, the company's going to make money and you're going to get profit sharing. Or we're not doing too well on that. Got to do something about it. So it's a matter of people need to be able to understand how the work that they do matters. They also need to be able to understand how their work impacts other people's work. And the more that you have an organized system, for people to make that known. I mean, there are a number of systems for doing that. I'm familiar with sociocracy, but there are many other ways that's.
Yeah. Okay, great. I really loved this discussion, and I hope people would take time to listen to it. I just wanted to thank you for today, and also to just highlight the future series, tagging on some of the things that you have said. You spoke a lot about company, sorry, I'm looking at my notes, a company buying itself, right? I loved that language that you use, because anyone can relate. Because one of the questions that especially business owners ask is, what is this employee ownership? And I think we as practitioners or the ecosystem participants, we make it difficult by using all these acronyms, ESOP, EOTs, worker co-op. And I think Deb has done such a great job in explaining those three, and also her work that she's currently involved in, where I find it resonates with me, is using employee ownership, not just as a sort of worker strategy, like to sort of complement collective bargaining and all of that, but to use it also for social justice. I love that piece. And I think that besides me and Deb being mom of twins, I think we click on that. Because for me, it was when I was chatting to Deb prior, it was the first time I met someone who understood how we can use employee ownership to achieve social justice and some of the equity goals that we've been struggling with, even like gender equity. Yesterday, I had a conversation with a 100% employee-owned company in the construction sector, and we were talking about that. And sometimes I can see how people struggle to see that piece of using worker co-ops the way you want to use that as a strategy to address more systemic and structural issues that we have all really battled with. And I'm so excited about this YouTube series. And I wanted to also thank—
Can I just say one more thing?
I'm excited about it. Yeah, go for it.
First of all, business owners out there.
Yeah.
While I am licensed in Michigan and New Hampshire, I've done this work all over the country.
Okay, great.
We work with local lawyers to whatever extent we need to deal with whatever the local law issues are. So we can use a New Hampshire EOT any place in the country.
Okay.
Secondly, my website, www.esoplaw.com, ESOPLAW.com, has a lot of examples in it. So one of the things you will see when you go in there is explanations of all of these different ways of doing this, but also a whole set of case studies that are described in various different ways in various different categories that say, well, this is an owner-led one, this is a union-led one, this is various kinds of things. So we're available.
Oh,
I'm going to give you my phone number too.
Oh, yes, you can plug
313-300-6517. But if you
go for
Deborah
it
Groban
again.
Olson online, you'll find me.
Can you go for it again? Just your number?
Yeah, then the phone number is 313-300-6517. And the website is ESOPLAW.com.
All right. Great. So thank you to everyone who's listening. And Deb, I'll connect with you on my research, my thesis. I'm excited to have you in my corner. And I also wish you well with the Rhode Island project and EOTs. I feel that they are such a viable and timely strategy to promote broad-based ownership and just shared wealth in general. So thank you so much and have a great day. I will catch up with you later on via text.
Thank you, Lizah, and thank you also to the Vermont Employee Ownership Center for doing this work and for all of the work that the Vermont Center has been doing for all these years, which has been superb and moving the movement.
Yes, and I also direct anyone to the Vermont Employee Ownership Center.